Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined as always by my wonderful co-host, attorney Sonia Madison. How you doing, Sonia?
This has been a great week. It started off with my birthday on Sunday.
Happy belated birthday, by the way.
Thank you. Got an opportunity to celebrate my niece. And happy, of course. I know Courtney got some celebration in over the weekend, and it ended with the announcement that we have a former president convicted on 34 counts
Oh, Lord.
under New
Oh,
York law. So I
geez.
mean, and I say that smilingly, although with a little bit of, it's not necessarily a celebration. Let me just put it
It
that way.
looks like a celebration to
But
me.
it but, but it was definitely necessary. And so that is how I'm doing. How are you?
I'm excited. My daughter, as you mentioned, my daughter graduated as well this past week, and I'm glad that the weekend is over and the celebration is over. We had far too many people over to the house and celebrating, and um, far too much food. Although I will say that I smoked some pulled chicken that was, oh my God, it was so
Hey,
good.
it's not a show unless you are not dusting your shoulders off with
I
social
did,
television.
I did pulled chicken, pulled pork, did some ribs, rib tips, hamburgers, hot dogs, chicken.
So you had too many people and too much
Delicious.
food. That doesn't even make sense. Sounds like you
It,
were planning for all these
it
for
was,
too many people.
it was. I just didn't plan for too much food, and then all of the other sides and fixings too. I'm glad to be over it. I find myself now actually becoming pretty selfish because we are about to be empty nesters, and after 31 years of rearing children, I'm really settling into not having to really be concerned about what my children are doing or, being home for my children or, not arranging our schedules to accommodate our children. So I'm excited about that. I think Doris is a little bit nervous, but I said, don't be nervous. You get to spend much more time with me now. And so I get to consume all your time and energy, affection, attention,
Well,
all of
if
that
that's
stuff.
what you said, I'd be nervous too. I don't know if that eased her concerns.
Hey, she's loved me for 31 years, so she's been enjoying it right now. So it just takes on a whole new level of appreciation and enjoyment and bliss. So that's what
Well,
I'm looking forward
congratulations on her 31 years.
to. So you turned 35
Yes, we'll go with that. And
times, times,
we'll go with that.
times one point something. Okay, did you do anything special for your birthday?
Well, I did have some people over, and I did have a lot of leftover food, but so
Mhm.
not too many people, but definitely had too much food. But just it's just good to be able to have fellowship with people that love you and celebrate you and just want to be around you.
Do
And
you
so
really think they love you and celebrate you though?
I really think they do. I understand why you would ask that question because I get that you ponder it when people are around you. But I do, I do think they did. I do think they did. And I got flowers. I was people that actually people took me out to dinner, which was nice. It was a good weekend, even
But
though.
does that equate to love though?
Well, I'm not saying that
An
just that
expression of
alone.
love,
I'm
an
not saying
expression
that.
of celebration. Does that equate to
I don't,
celebrate?
of course,
That's how
I
you feel
don't think
celebrated?
of course, I don't think a one-time incident equates to love. But again, this is the same people that celebrate year after year and show love throughout the year. So
Maybe
this
they
is
just
just
like your
another,
parties.
this is
It
just
might,
another incident of love.
it might just like your parties. They're like, she really knows how to celebrate herself. Let me go and enjoy some of this while she celebrates herself.
Hey, like I said, I know that's not the case, but nonetheless, I get why
I'm
you
sure it's not
ponder.
the case.
I get
I'm
why
not.
you ponder. I
I'm sure
will
it's
say
not the
you
case.
throw some great parties. I hate that I could not be there for the party that you put together because you
We're gonna
do
say
throw some
through
through
some
together.
great parties,
Oh,
through some
okay.
great parties,
You
because
threw
we
a
don't do
great
this
party.
anymore. It's over. It's over. Dries said, we're not doing this anymore. This is the last one. I said, okay. We did used to throw some really nice Christmas parties too, and it's just become so burdensome. And
It's work.
people,
It's work.
it is a lot of work, and like I said, I'm becoming selfish and lazy,
Mhm.
so that becomes a challenge. And so, anyhow, back on to Hunter Biden's trial start this coming week. I know you and a whole lot of other Republicans are very excited to see what happens with
Oh no, I'm a Republican, huh?
that.
Nice way to try to throw that in there.
Yeah, they were really excited about that starting this week. And so I think this is the one for the gun charges. And so what's interesting to me is because you hear so many people who are, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later on in the topic, but you hear a lot of Republicans coming out and complaining about how these charges were brought against Donald Trump. And they'll say, well, if he hadn't been Trump, they never would have brought these charges. And, I wonder if the same situation occurs for Hunter Biden. If he hadn't been the president's son, how aggressive would they have been on pursuing that? And the same situation you can look at make the same argument about the outcome of the verdict. If the verdict that they gave for Trump this past week hadn't been uh, if he had been found not guilty, then they would have said, hey, the justice system worked the way that it's supposed to work and not,
Right.
it's rigged, it's lawfare and other things of that nature. So I'm really perplexed by how some people will have varying opinions, which is what we call hypocrisy, I guess, when you say it's good for me but not for thee. And I posted something this past week. I said, our justice system has always had some disparity. And this whole notion of prosecutorial discretion, it has always been there. And it is also always fallible because it depends on the discretion of the prosecutor as to whether or not they bring charges. Historically, that has disfavored the poor, it's disfavored people of color. And now, when it disfavors somebody who is white and wealthy, now all of a sudden it's a problem. I had a conversation with a woman at the hospital the other day, talking about, well, they should never brought those charges against him. If he broke the law, he broke the law. And that's the prosecutor's discretion whether or not they bring the charges to him. And it's hard for me to be sympathetic as a black man, realizing that anytime there is an opportunity to bring a charge against you, that they will bring the charge in most cases. So you have to walk around extra careful to keep your nose clean so that you don't give them any place to even fabricate a charge against you, one that let alone 12 jurors will find you guilty of unanimously.
Well, and I first of all think that when it comes at least to former convicted felon Donald Trump, uh, a former president that is convicted. To me, he brought this on himself. He really, I mean, you banter, you talk about how no, I've never, I should be above the law. I don't do anything illegal. You tell people that you don't falsify records. You tell people that you don't pay taxes. You tell people that you should be immune to so much stuff that to some degree, to your point, justice to me doesn't work if not only you're touting the ability not to be held accountable, but you're also then saying that any effort to hold you accountable would be what essentially other people's doing. It would be if someone else's fault, because you heard him. I don't know if you listened to his speech after the conviction, but he gets on there and says, "Oh, the Democrats have done this to me, and they're just trying to go after me because of who I am, and to punish anyone that's against their party." And again, when you have that kind of rhetoric, I am then begging for the justice system to do what they're supposed to do, so that we as a country have faith that no, there is a checks and balance going on here. I mean, we have three branches for a reason, and if they are not all checking each other, then what kind of justice is this? And so I think he brought a lot of this on himself. Because don't get me wrong, I don't think he's the first person, or even the first president, or even the first leader to falsify records or to or defraud or to miscommunicate what's going on in their finances. We know people, there's a reason why what President Biden did in terms of adding more numbers to the IRS was so we know that a lot of people are committing fraud or are not reporting what should be reported on their taxes. We know that they exist. And this is money that could go towards the government to help clear up and remove the deficiency that we have, the deficit that we have. And so, I'm not saying that he's some anomaly. He's the only person that's ever done it. But I am saying you put it out so blatantly that you leave people no choice but to say, no, we cannot let this slide. We have to hold you accountable. Or get back to your point as it relates to even Black people. I mean, we know that for a lot of reasons, the criminal justice system was founded for the purpose of making sure slaves were captured. It was all about a racial type of motive. And so from
At
that
least the
perspective,
police.
yeah,
At least the police. Yeah. That's why the
yeah.
police were formed. Yeah.
And so at least from that perspective, when it comes to law enforcement, then we have to have that play out. And I think that again, Donald Trump brought this on himself. And so I don't think you can compare this with any other situations where people may feel as if the justice system may be treated differently or prosecutorial discretion was abused.
Yeah, it's well, well, it's unfortunate. I agree with you that he said that he did bring a lot of this stuff on himself. And it reminded me of when we did the reunion show, and there was one gentleman who came on, and one of the stories, as we were talking about, he was pretty prominent and occupied a pretty prominent position in Alabama, and I don't want to even mention his position or anything because I know he was speaking pretty candidly about some things, but he said they will give you just enough space as long as you don't start feeling like you're getting too big for your britches. And when you get a little too big for your britches, that's when they decide that they would rein you in. And he recognized that as a long-standing permission that we have for Black people to go a certain length as long as you don't cross that line. Unfortunately, I think sometimes when you're white and wealthy, you realize you believe that you don't have that line. And I won't just say white and wealthy, we'll say even just wealthy, because in this country, wealth does provide a lot of a comfort. Bible says money is a shade. And you're right.
Yeah,
It
but
provides.
we'll see if P. Diddy agrees. But yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. That's my point. That's my point. And so what's happened was that he's gotten away with a lot of things too.
Mhm.
And that's why I retracted the white statement. But when you're wealthy, it does provide a lot of protection for you. But eventually you get to the point where you cross that line and somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to pull you back here and show you exactly what you're made of." And so in this case, Alvin Braggs did that. Now people criticize his decision to prosecute, and and I do want to talk about this just a little bit, just because I know there's a lot of confusion out there about how the charges were brought. Now, granted, the falsification of business records is a misdemeanor charge, and I believe in New York it had like a statute of limitation of 2 years or something, and that statute of limitations had exceeded. And I don't think that in his role as the DA, he's the DA, right? Yeah, he's the DA. I don't think in his role as the DA, he had the ability to prosecute Donald Trump for election fraud or election interference or any other type of federal election related crime. However, if the jury were to find that, or if the DA were to find that he committed this misdemeanor in an attempt to commit a higher crime, then he can convert the misdemeanor to a felony. And converting that misdemeanor of falsification of business records, being converted to a felony, then gave the statute of limitations, what, like 6 years or something.
Well,
And so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that's why he was able to now bring this charge. And I know people criticize because they say, we don't even know what the crime is. Well, you knew what the crime was all along. On some of the other conservative news stations, they'll say, you knew what the crime that he was being charged with was. It's falsification of business records. Now, if he committed that in the process of trying to cover up another crime, which was the election fraud or election interference or election finance violations or whatever, he didn't have to get tried on that higher charge. He just had to prove that he had some other intention to falsifying these business records. And that's why the judge and his instructions to the jury gave a lot of leeway to say, you don't even have to agree on what the other crime was. That does sound a little shady. That does sound a little shady right there. Y'all don't have to even agree on what, all of you don't have to agree on what the other crime was. You just have to agree that there was another crime that he was trying to cover up in order to convict him for the falsification of business records, which then was a felony.
Well, and just again, just to expand so people can fully understand what was going on. I mean, we're talking about not only the $130,000 that he paid to Michael Cohen and for in exchange of Stormy Daniels' silence, but he also paid him continuous more money, not only to compensate for the taxes related to that 130K payout, but also bonuses because of the payout. I mean, this is like a thank you for doing. And so what his defense is, well, no, he was my attorney. So it was no falsification. I was paying him, I was for legal services. Now I'm glad because there was at least one person on the jury, at least from my understanding, I could be wrong, but there's at least one person on the jury who was a fan of True Social. He got all his news from True Social. And so the fact that even that person said, yeah, you were wrong. You violated the law, and what Trump wanted to do was have each individual juror say, yes, guilty, yes, guilty. So this wasn't you slip a paper to the judge and the judge reads it and there isn't each person, saying, yes, I affirm that decision, but this was going down the line. And each of them said, yeah, guilty, yeah, guilty. And so this narrative that, oh, it's the Democrats coming after me. No, I mean, we heard about the testimony of Michael Cohen, which is probably the strongest testimony that was presented in the case. Michael Cohen said, yes, he knew that these payments were for this. He knew. And that was really all that the prosecution had to show, was that he knew that he was falsifying those records. And did Donald Trump take the stand? I mean, because he could have
Well, he
very well.
wanted to.
He
He
could have very
wanted to.
well. And it is his right, right? It is his right if he wanted to, and that is his right. Because often we see on TV, the judge will ask, "Hey, you understand that it is your right to take the stand, and you are on your own volition electing not to do so." He could have taken the stand and said, no, I didn't know. I thought I was just giving him legal services. I always thought I was paying for legal services. But he knew, for those people wondering, well, why didn't he just do that? Oh, he knew that prosecution was going to go after him. And he doesn't want to be held accountable to all his actions that become free reign once you take the stand. And one of the things that the prosecution did, which I thought was great, and this is from CBS News, because again, this wasn't a televised event, so I can only report based on what I read. But one of the things that they did was put up a poster and had each check. Count one, here's the check. Count two, here's the check. Count three, here's the check. Each check identifying the falsification that was paid to Michael Cohen. And so with each check, to me, if I'm a juror, I'm like, okay, well, if I'm thinking count one and here's the check in front of me, and count two, here's the check in front of me. I mean, that visualization really does help when it comes to getting the verdict that you're seeking after. And so, I mean, to me, it was a slam dunk case, and I don't doubt that Attorney Bragg probably came to Donald Trump and say, "Listen, before we bring these charges, do you want to settle? Do you want to do this or this and this?" And he said, no, I didn't do anything wrong. And so that's why I say he brought this on himself. We had a public defender on the show who says, hey, oftentimes we're meeting beforehand to get this stuff settled so it doesn't become bigger than what it could be, or so you may not get the harshest sentence. But when there is no meeting of the minds to come together, or no recognition that you've done anything wrong, then I've got to hold you accountable, which I think is part of what we're talking about today. I think it's one thing if you acknowledge the wrong and that you're saying, hey, you're going to move different. It's another when you're not even acknowledging the wrong. So
Right.
then there's so then there's no deterrence for you to change your ways.
So then there comes the issue about the judge making the sentence and determining what the sentence will be. And I don't envy this judge because he has to make some really difficult decisions. Now, one of the things that they obviously several things they'll consider. What is his history? Has he ever been in trouble with the law before? You know, his age being a 77-year-old man. Are you really going to incarcerate him for this? Um, but then the other thing that you have to consider is what level of contrition he has. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this man has no level of contrition,
We heard him. We heard
and
him
he
outside the
still
courtroom.
denies it. Not only does he not have contrition, but he continues to vilify the judge, who is the one who's supposed to make the decision about what the punishment will be. And it's probably a good thing that I'm not the judge at this moment.
Well,
Because,
and just before everyone gets excited, he will likely appeal this. And so we may not even get a sentencing. I mean, I know they scheduled the date for July 11th, but it could be postponed if the judge decides to just wait for the appeal process to play out. So,
yeah, it's
and
probably
that
to
could happen.
Donald Trump's advantage to have it actually get sentenced. Because one way or the other, what's going to happen is if he sentences him to jail, he'll probably raise even more money because
Oh,
they're
he
talking
raised what,
about
like 35 or something million
50
overnight?
million actually. It was the last number I heard was like 50 millions in almost 20 in a 24-hour period of time or something. So but yeah, definitely 35, somewhere between 35 and 50 million that he's raised, which is more than any other presidential candidate ever has raised in a 24-hour period of time. Go figure that. Why is that? And so I'm concerned that we have now a lack of accountability. And when you are in a certain position, and in his case, this position of former president and presidential candidate, likely presidential nominee, that you are now immune to certain levels of accountability. This judge, it's really unbelievable. It's hard to imagine that he would ever prescribe for Donald Trump any jail time. He has the option of giving him a $5,000 uh per charge or per conviction fine. So 5 times 34, what's that? 100 and I mean 5,000, so that's $170,000 or something like that. He paid that much to Stormy Daniels just to keep her quiet. So, so what type of penalty is that going to be to him at some point? You can make him do community service, but even if he did community service, that's what I would probably do. Make him get out and clean up trash on the streets
I
with the
don't want
Secret
him. I
Service.
don't want him out in the public where a camera can get in his face.
This is
Excuse me,
probably
and he
good.
will continue to spew about look what they're doing to me. I don't need him out in the public anymore. And just again for our viewers, the penalty, the max penalty, I want to say is 4 years for each conviction, and as well as a $5,000 fine. And so, yeah, it's likely he'll probably get home confinement, probation.
They
You
can't
know.
even give him home confinement because if they give him home confinement, then they'll say, "Look at that! They're trying to keep me from being on the campaign trail," and so he's
No, I
in
mean
a
he'll use it, but I'm just saying to your point, I think the judge will likely consider those type of options other than the jail time.
yeah. So I think we're in an impossible situation where in any case, he'll never be held accountable for this infraction. It's interesting that you said it was a slam dunk case. I'm not sure that it was a slam dunk case. I never heard that reference before because most people were saying this was the weakest of all the charges that were brought against him.
You were
And
listening to Truth Social. Come
no,
back to the
I
come
even
back
heard
to
it on I
reality.
heard it on CNN. CNN, people will and they try to provide some balanced thoughts as well.
Balance news,
But
yes.
the thing is, the reason why is because it was such a convoluted concept, and it's not something that's often used. I think they were saying if there was a burglar, if you committed a burglary and the burglary was itself considered a misdemeanor, but or petty crime. But if it were done in the process, or you stole a gun to go kill somebody, then the burglary itself can then be escalated. And granted, those are a strong or extreme examples of similar things. But I think there was another case like that tried in New York where there was another person who was prosecuted that way. But obviously, these things will come up on appeal, and they don't even have to come up on appeal for him to be held to be relieved
Well,
of
and again, just
accountability.
just so people understand, when it comes up on appeal, it's not about retrying the case. I mean, that's not what the purpose of appeal is. Appeal is about, okay, was the law correctly applied? And was there any, abuse of either the judge, or was there prosecutorial misconduct? I mean, it's not going to be, hey, did the facts actually present themselves as facts? Like, we're not going to relitigate the facts. The facts have been established. That is what a jury is supposed to do, is say, hey, these are the facts as we as the jury or the fact finder are supposed to determine. And so the only thing that can be appealed is, okay, was the law that, like, for example, like you said, the judge sent out jury instructions. Were those jury instructions accurate, or were they an abuse? I mean, that is the type of stuff that gets reviewed on appeal.
Yeah, but they'll even say even that the charges shouldn't have been brought. First of all, he's talking about a crime that a secondary crime that Alvin Braggs has no jurisdiction over, and which begs the question, are you even able to do that? Apparently, this judge felt that that was a reasonable thing to do. But of course, that will be one of the things that'll be mentioned in the appeal, and it will go through the appellate court, the local appellate court, and then it'll eventually wind up going up to the Supreme Court, where I predict it's going to be overturned.
Well, I will say that if Trump wins, I would agree with you. But to me, if Biden wins this election, I don't think that the Supreme Court would overturn it. I mean, and maybe that is just my faith or optimism in Chief Justice Roberts, because he seems to be someone that really is trying not to make it appear that the court is political. But I don't feel like if the people, and that's why it's so important that we get out and vote, but I feel like if the people get out and vote and say, no, we're not going to have this convicted felon as our president, I think that will send a message that will also, to me, resonate with the appellate courts.
But they don't. The Supreme Court doesn't care what the people believe.
Again, Chief Justice Roberts does care about the perception of the
Yeah,
court.
but he's
He's
one voice.
articulated that, but he's the chief.
He's
He
one
is
of five.
the he
He's
is
one of
the
six.
head. He is
He's
the
right
head
now.
of it, and I think they all will, to some degree, agree with that sentiment.
Okay, well then let's talk about Justice Alito then.
I mean,
and
talk
his
about it, because that's
and
one
his
person.
wife and his wife flying the flag upside down. What is Justice Robert doing about that? Nothing. What is he doing about the other flag that his wife flew at their vacation home, both of which were symbols in support of January 6th? He's doing nothing about that. What did he do about Clarence Thomas and Jenny Thomas being active participants in planning of the January 6th riot and insurrection? Nothing. Now, these two
But
people,
what did Chief Justice Roberts do about Obamacare? Because he could have
nothing.
easily, no, whatever. He was the deciding vote that said, no, this is
Right,
legal. I mean, I know y'all don't like it. Hey, I don't even like it, but it's
right.
legal. And so, I mean, I mean, I definitely hear you. And I do think that, to your point, when it comes to the ethics of a court, the court does need to have some ethics, and they do need to start holding even its own. I agree with you 100% on that. But I just think that when it comes to deciding the cases that go to the court, which is one of the responsibilities of Chief Justice Roberts, to decide which cases they're going to hear, I think that's a different conversation.
So why are they just now hearing that? Why did they delay then the January 6th presidential immunity case? Justice Roberts, I get it. I give him some credit that he does seem to want to protect what the image of the court is, but he also recognizes its limitations. And I do understand that there are some ways that he can hold those justices accountable, and very little minimal ways, very few ways. But one of the things he could do is stop them from being not no longer assigned majority opinions for them to write. And I don't know how big of an issue it is for justice to be denied an opportunity to write a majority opinion. I don't know. To me, that would be a pretty egomaniacal type of thing to say, "Oh no, don't stop me from writing a majority opinion. This is what I wanted to do. I want my name to go down in infamy and in
Yeah,
history." And
yeah.
so, but yes, he could do that. I don't know how influential of a or how impactful of a penalty that is for him. I think Congress just needs to really step forward and create some kind of laws, and we need to demand that Congress create some kind of laws that hold the Supreme Court justices accountable. Because anytime you have people who have too much power and they can evade consequences, there's a problem because chaos and eventually dictatorship follows through it. And that's what I'm concerned about Donald Trump not being able to be punished and be held accountable not only on the base from the constituents of the United States citizens, but also from Congress, from the Supreme Court, and even from members of his own party. Nobody's holding him accountable. And as a result, evil and corruption continues to flourish as a
Okay,
consequence.
and people are raising $35 million for that evil to
He's
flourish.
being rewarded,
I know, right? It would
not accountable, but rewarded.
rewarded. It's baffling to me. Now, tell me from your perspective, what would you like to see? Would you like to see him in jail? Because I mean, it's also hard because I know you said it's got to be a difficult position to be in as a judge. But I mean, he does have a platform. He was our former president. It does send a message overseas, as it relates to, hey, the corruption that is of the United States. What would you like to see the punishment be?
I think the only thing that would actually be beneficial is to have him in jail. I and that position is evolving because the financial penalty is minimal. If he's doing community service, he's going to take every opportunity to actually hey, look at me picking up trash. This is why I need to be back in the office and in the Oval Office. You put him in jail, he doesn't have a platform for a period of time. And you just sit there. I don't know how long I put him in, probably 30 days or so. And you know,
So not 4 years, but
not
maybe.
maybe not 4 years, but I would put him in there for about 30 days, get him enough time to become Bubba's boy girlfriend a little bit. But of course it'll be a white collar prison. But I do think that 30 days, because he has such disdain and disrespect for the judiciary, and it probably needs to have some kind of firm type of action. What about you?
You know, I hate, and I will say I do hate to say this because I really don't relish anyone being incarcerated. And, oftentimes when I even think about fathers that are incarcerated, I mean, the impact that that has on their children, not being raised without their father present. Now, I'm sure you can, of course, make the argument that they may be better off because you don't want to be raised by someone who thinks committing crimes is the way you should lead your life. But it's nonetheless, I do think it's important, even there to recognize someone's hurting, someone is losing out of this. And in this situation, it is us at the United States, because not only have we voted this guy in office and have had allowed him and continue to make your point, continue to ask that he continue to lead us. But then we hurt, from if that is what the majority wants, granted, we'll be doing this live with me in overseas. But if that is what the majority wants as their president, you know, then it hurts for the country not to have the person that they wanted in that leadership. But because of that, because I do not want him in the leadership, I want him locked up. To me, what also needs to happen is that full page ad that he did on Central Park 5. Someone needs to do that, since he's convicted and claiming that he's innocent. And so, yeah, I would, And I know you say 30 days. I'm like, I at least want to see him locked up for a year. I mean, one says, hey, sorry, you can't be president because you're locked up. I don't want my president serving from a jail cell. But two, I just don't think that he will recognize, if we're looking at the reasons for punishment or the reasons for the sentencing, we're looking at the punishment, deterrence, retribution, and gosh, so that's one, it is escaping me, but we're looking at those four factors. And so I just feel like it's going to take more than 30 days for any of those four factors to work.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I'll evolve change that a little bit, modify it. Maybe I would give the threat of a longer sentence and give him the option of choosing that sentence or publishing an apology, a public apology for what his role was in this situation and an admission of all of those things.
Yes, need that admission. Yeah.
And then if he violates that in any way, shape, or form, that he will now have the this full sentence enforced against him in prison.
I
Yeah,
mean, that could work, right? That could
yeah. I mean, you tell him to stop all the nonsense, and don't you commission anybody else to get out there and make these same false arguments on your behalf. And if you choose to do those, then you get the full sentence that I was going to initially impose on you. Just Marshawn, I hope you are watching the Roundtable Consult today, but that's my suggestion to you, and I hope you take it serious.
And for those wondering, because I watch Court Cam often. There have been judges that say your punishment is you need to make a sign, you need to put
Mhm.
this on the sign, and you need to stand out and wave the sign in public, and that is your punishment. So that is at least a punishment that has been used.
Yeah, and
Um,
that will become part of Joe Biden's campaign,
okay.
unfortunately. And of course, they will say that, that's the only reason why the judge did that is to help Joe Biden win. And like, well, whatever.
I
They
mean,
couldn't lock him up.
at this point, we can't even think about how people are going to perceive it
Right.
because there's no winning. I mean, even bringing the trial itself, to your point that we talked about earlier, was going to look as if we're going after the Republican Party. And when I say we, I'm not saying we as in Democrats. I'm just saying we as in the people of New York, because that was what was happening. And so make no mistake, because he will continue to say this over and over. This was not a Democrat's decision. And if anything, I think Democrats probably would have leaned towards not doing it so that he doesn't get this extra 35 to $50 million that he raised overnight, right?
And, publicity. They say bad
Right.
publicity is still publicity. Your name is still out in the public sphere. Donald Trump is a genius in this regard. He understands the power and the impact of repetition, saying the same thing over and over and over again. That's all marketing really is presenting the same product over and over and over again. And eventually somebody says, I cannot live without this product. You play the same song. Hits are made at radio. As a musician, I know, as a recording artist myself, I know that hits are made by radio. They're not necessarily made in the studio. You write a great song in a studio, but you create a great hit by getting the replay of that music over and over and over again. If you have a great song, chances are the radio stations will play it over and over again. But you don't have to have a great song for
You
the
don't.
radio station to play it over and over again if you got the other means to influence those radio stations. So it's the value of repetition, and I think we underestimate the value of that. But Donald Trump has mastered it. I get tired of hearing him say the same thing over and over. Every time he walked out of that court during the trial, he would say the exact same thing over and over again. And guess what? It started resonating with people, and now you hear everybody else who supports him say the precise and exact same thing that he says. It's marketing genius, I think.
I mean, I don't dispute that the guy does well in marketing because he is convinced people that a lie is the truth. And I'm just not talking about when it comes to this trial. I mean, you go back to the birther movement. I mean, he convinced people that former President Obama, who was not born in the United States, convinced them. And you still cannot tell some people to this day that that is a lie. And so, I mean, I agree. He's good at turning a lie into the truth. But that to me is also why I worry that if we do not instill some punishment on him, and that it will just continue this wave of him thinking and people falling in line with the fact that one, there are certain people above the law, but then two, that this is the type of leadership we should have for our country.
I don't know. Does everybody need to always be held accountable for their wrongdoing?
Well, and that's why I say I look at those four factors because I mean that, and I think that was part of this conversation is, I think we understand that everyone is held to the same level of accountability as others because we
You
know.
think so?
I don't know. Of course, I don't think everyone. We
Oh,
see this play out. I mean, the Central Park Five is compare that to what Donald Trump is saying he's innocent of. I mean, we see over and over, and again, you've articulated when it comes to poor people, when it comes to people of lesser means, they're more likely to be arrested and convicted than someone with more means. But I also do think, even going to the factors that the judge is going to consider, I do think those are sufficient factors to consider. And we do this all the time when someone is labeled as insane, do we say that they should get the same sentence or even the same facility as someone who's sane when they committed the crime? We look at, okay, if someone's a child, should they get the same sentence as someone who's an adult that committed the crime? And even when we're looking at leadership, I mean, I do think we look at, okay, how does this affect the people that are following this person? Because you can't just simply look at the person, you have to look at the factors that will be affected by the punishment. And so in this situation, there are several situations in which someone of Donald Trump's stature probably would not have even been convicted or charged in this. That's why I say Donald Trump brought a lot of this on himself. And I do think that that is something that, and I know it's unfair, but it's also fair considering that you do want to look at the totality of someone's life in deciding what the appropriate punishment or deterrence or retribution should be. So,
and anytime there's that level of disparity, regardless of how it's implemented or why it's implemented, there will be critics of it. Um, O.J. Simpson got off,
don't
and
say get off. He was
huh?
found not guilty. Don't say get off like he
Well, he
was
was
found
found not guilty.
guilty.
He was found not
He
guilty.
was found guilty, didn't have to serve jail time. No, he did not get off. He was found not guilty.
Exactly. But even still, that's what people still look at that and they will say that he got off of it. Even though he was found not guilty, doesn't mean that he was innocent. And so let's not
It
confuse those
also
two
doesn't mean that
words.
guilty either,
It doesn't mean that he was guilty either.
right?
But there are people, but I'm saying regardless of what the outcome is, there will be people who will criticize that decision and say that that's not fair, and it truly isn't fair. And I'm actually thinking of the scripture. I think there's a scripture in Roman where God said, I will show kindness to whom I will show kindness to, and or whoever I choose to show kindness to. I'll show mercy to whoever I choose to show mercy to. And I don't think even as a believer that we should necessarily be disappointed when somebody is shown mercy. And I think what will happen is that if he is shown mercy, there will be a lot of us who will be quite upset that he received the type of mercy that we would ourselves want, but don't want him to want to receive. And I don't know that we're any that much better than Donald Trump or some other or
Oh,
O.J.
wow, look at
Simpson
that.
or whatever else. When you consider, well, the Bible says if you commit one sin, you're guilty of committing them all. And so I'm saying from the standpoint of if you want to look at it from a spiritual and or religious standpoint, if you really believe what the Bible says, is that all of our righteousness are as filthy rags. And so does that make us any more deserving of mercy than Donald Trump is deserving of the mercy?
Well, and I do want to, because you brought up Jesus in the Bible, and a lot of people have been making comparisons that yeah, they hung Jesus, and let's be clear. First of all, if we're looking at the Bible, was it Pilate? He said, "Hey, I don't see any crime here."
Uh-huh.
So this isn't the same. There was no state conviction as we have here. But also, again, he had the opportunity to bring forth evidence to make his defense. And this is the outcome. And either we decide that we support the justice system in its form of 12 people being able to decide if someone is guilty or not, at least as it relates to New York, or we decide that, okay, well, now we don't have a faith in the judicial system. So
How would you have responded if he had been found not guilty?
I mean, I would have been surprised. I would have been extremely surprised. But it's just like you said with the OJ. I mean, that's you have to accept the verdict.
That's the problem is that we don't have to accept it. There are people who are determining that they don't have to accept it. So what they can do is they can change the judicial system to be something that serves their own personal needs. I think we have to start getting to the realization that we don't always get our way. We become a nation of spoiled
We're
brats.
not entitled, huh? Even though we
We're
say
not
we
entitled.
are.
We become a nation, an entitled nation. And so when half of us want one thing and the other half wants the other, somebody's going to be unhappy. And so right now, what concerns me is that when there is no accountability, then the others, those persons who support that person who's not held accountable, become more emboldened to take stronger and more bold steps toward undermining and even destroying democracy in this country and establishing up, what they call it, banana republics or something at that point. We're not far from that. When you got millions, tens of millions of people in the United States who have now listened to the echo chamber in their who sat in their echo chambers and listened to the message of Donald Trump be repeated over and over in their minds, saying Democrats are evil, they must be stopped. The judicial system is corrupt, and we have to go in and remove all those people. And the only way that we can do that is through getting you out here to vote for me. And once I'm in, I'm going to get rid of all of them. And to some extent, he probably will have a significant impact um on the face of that branch of government. He's already had a substantial
Right.
impact
And
on
he's
that
already
branch.
shown through his last presidential, administration that he will discriminate. I mean, we had a Supreme Court say that your, ban on flights or the whole, brown and brown and black people can't fly certain things was in fact discriminatory. And so we know that if he takes office again, he will abuse that position for his own gain. And we know he's in large amounts of debt. So we know he's going to use his position to pay off some of that debt, probably definitely not all, but also to again make business decisions that are more favorable towards his businesses. And when we know that that's something he's being looked at, already right now.
And use the power that he has for intimidation to induce compliance. Right now, all of the Republicans lining up, all the potential VP nominations lining up and just really demeaning and denigrating the judicial system, saying that, this is lawfare, and every single one of them. And I'm sitting there thinking, don't you all have any conviction of your own? When I see all you all show up in the blue suits and your red tie, because that's what he wanted you to do, so that you look like you're wearing a uniform and you're saying the same thing. You guys are now becoming a militia for Donald Trump. And when you form a militia for a particular individual, the next step is to go to battle. And if he loses, God forbid what will happen at that point.
We January 6th plus times two, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that again, that's the fear that I have, and that's why I'm like, he got to be locked up. I can't have this person continuing to run. I don't, and I hate to say this idea that you don't trust the people, but the fact that he raised so much money, I was just like, I don't even trust people anymore. I mean, I don't know about you, but there is still a genuine fear that he could win.
Yeah, there is. There's a real, not just fear, it's a real probability. It's a good probability on top of that. It's a good probability that he
And
will.
he's already said, I can shoot someone and y'all are going to vote for me. And so then you vote for this guy after being convicted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think he will continue to move the needles. Already got Supreme Court saying, hey, I need y'all to rule that I have immunity. And so I just have a fear of him winning, particularly in light of the fact that not only is he taunting and in the face of entitlement, because again, you can say, oh, people need to recognize that they're not entitled, but if they're electing a leader who says otherwise, then that's the leadership that our country goes into.
Yeah, it's one thing to, I think, hold somebody accountable, but then when you try to undermine those people who and villainize those people who actually attempt to hold them accountable, you wind up losing anybody who desires and who would have the courage to hold a person accountable at that point, because you realize that now you got death threats against you, you got death threats against your family. These jurors, God forbid, if their identity ever comes out, and at some point it will come out. I, I you know,
You
Donald
think
Trump's
Donald Trump
calling
is
them every day.
gonna that's him, go get
Exactly.
him.
These poor jurors, and even the judge and his family, and Alvin Braggs, these people are undoubtedly under incredible scrutiny and under a huge threat of bodily harm. And when you determine that, hey, I don't know that my trying to hold you accountable is worth compromising the safety of my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
It's one thing for me to say, hey, I'm willing to take this risk for myself. It's a whole different story when you say that I know that the life of my wife and my children, my vulnerable children, are now at risk because there are some kooks out there who are going to villainize me and want to destroy me because I simply tried to hold somebody accountable for breaking the law.
And no, make no mistake, former Donald Trump, you are one of the coots because because he will lead the charge for that to happen. And to your point, we already saw it here in Georgia because Fani, she said, hey, I asked several people and I got a lot of no's because no one wanted to suffer through that kind of not only scrutiny, because again, I don't think too many people may complain about the scrutiny part, but they will, to your point, complain about the threats. I don't want to have to deal with the threats on my life or the life of my family.
Hmm. And I think that's what happens when we start valuing our lives too much. And it's true. Jesus
I
said,
mean,
listen,
that's right. Because to your point, your life isn't your own, anyways, right?
right, you're right. Jesus said, if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose it for my sake, you'll gain eternal life. And so somebody has to still take the risk and step out. I'm writing this book right now that this book is probably going to make me a target of some people, of some people's ire, especially if it becomes as popular as I hope that it would be in terms of getting the message out to really enlighten people. And Teresa's like, they might be trying to come after you for your life. And she thought about that part of it. I was like, yeah, that's probably okay. But the other part of it was like, what if they come after you? That's what I'm saying. Oh, that could silence me a little bit. But we have to at some point realize that life isn't worth living if we don't make a difference, an eternal difference. And so and hopefully it's an eternal difference and not one that just fades away after you're dead and gone.
Well, so for our viewers, we would like to hear what sentence would you like Donald Trump to get, or would you like him to be sentenced at all? So definitely put that in your comments. Let us know how you're feeling about the verdict, and of course, any other comments that you want to have about the show. We hopefully look forward to hearing what you got to say.
There is a viewer who asks a question, and he says, "Can Georgia apply this current verdict toward their case?"
Well, it's two different issues. What's going on in Georgia is about whether or not he, again, had interfered with the election. And so they're looking at a different set of facts. They're looking at what he did in terms of, hey, find those 1,100 votes or all the stuff that he did with the secretary. And so it's a different not only statute, but it's a different level of what facts needs to be presented. But if you're asking, well, can we show a pattern of you committing crimes and be able to pull up, hey, look, because you got 34 convictions. So then, one, if Donald Trump were to take the stand, I think that becomes more open because then it's permittable to be able to use, certain evidence to show that this person is incredible. But also if he didn't take the stand, I'm sure what the defense would try to do is file a motion saying, hey, and all this other stuff in New York should not be considered. And then it'll be up to the judge to decide whether that is evidence that shouldn't be presented because it will unfairly prejudicial the jury. So we'll see if that ever happens or if he makes it up there. I think, Mark, you're frozen, or maybe I'm frozen. I guess we'll figure that out once we do the replay. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. You can catch us every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. You can also catch us on your favorite podcast platform. Please go follow us on those platforms. You can catch this episode on YouTube. Definitely subscribe over there. And you can catch a repeat of this episode on Star Radio. So until next Saturday, once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in and have a blessed week.